welcome to the All It Takes is a Goal podcast, the best place in the entire world, including all of Canada, to learn how to build new thoughts, new actions, and new results. I'm your host, John Acuff, and today I'm joined by David McRaney. Who's that? I'm so glad you asked. David McRaney is the author of How Minds Change, The Surprising Science of Belief, Opinion, and Persuasion. He's an author, journalist, lecturer, and the creator of the blog You Are Not So Smart, which has become a massive book as well, later followed by the book You Are Now Less Dumb. David currently hosts the popular You Are Not So Smart podcast and speaks internationally about irrational thinking and delusion. Before finding internet fame, David graduated with a degree in journalism from the University of Southern Mississippi and cut his teeth covering Hurricane Katrina on the Gulf Coast and in the Pine Belt region of the Deep South. He's been a beat reporter, an editor, a photographer, a voiceover artist, a television host, a digital content manager, and he also owned 2 pet stores. We talk about that in the episode. He's done everything. This episode was so fascinating to me because we talk a lot about his process as a writer, a lot about how the brain works. The book really digs into science, and there's so many fascinating things in this interview. I think you're going to absolutely love it. We even get into what do you do when you have a relative who has a different opinion than you? Like I asked him flat out because it's about persuasion. It's about why do we argue with people? The book's called How Minds Change. And so I said to him, okay, let's say you have an uncle who's a flat earther. It's going to be Thanksgiving. Your mom doesn't want you to fight with that uncle. What do you do? How do you have better conversations with people who disagree with you? Which I feel like the entire internet needs to listen to his answer because it's really, really helpful. The conversation is really fun. We talk about this car crash he got when he was 18 and how that changed his life and how it introduced whimsy in an unexpected way. It's a really fun conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it. But first, let's hear a quick message about the sponsor of today's episode. Today's sponsor is me. I've been really surprised at how many people who listen to this podcast have reached out to me about having me speak at their events. I love that. And here's why. Over the last 13 years, I've had the honor to help hundreds of companies like Nissan, Walmart, Microsoft, and Comedy Central at events around the world. And during that time, I've developed 3 big goals for your event. Number 1, I want to slingshot your audience into the best year they've ever had. Whether I'm opening, closing, or somewhere in the middle of the event, I want to launch everyone out of that room with actionable, memorable things that they can apply to their work and lives immediately. Number 2, my second goal, I want the sound team engaged and laughing. The sound team has heard it all. They have. And if I can make them laugh and learn along the way, the audience is going to absolutely love the keynote. And number 3, my third goal, I want you to get text messages during the keynote. My favorite sentence to hear from you after I speak is, John, my phone was blowing up during your keynote. I'm there to make you look like a rock star, not me. If your boss texts you during my speech and compliments you on how well the event is going, then I know I've done my job. Whether it's virtual or live, 10,000 people in an arena, or 15 sales team members on WebEx or Zoom or Microsoft Teams, I'd love to help you with your next event. Fill out the quick form at acuff.me/speaking to check my availability. That's Acuff, ACUFF.me/speaking. All right, let's jump into the interview with David McRaney. David, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. I'm really excited. Your book just came out, and it's already a editor's top pick on Amazon for best books of 2022. Congratulations. That's really exciting.
Thank you so much. Yeah, at the time of this recording, it came out yesterday. So I'm in that state that is very rare in life, the day after a very big project that took years. Yeah. The dust is settling around you, and you're like, well, I did a thing. It's there. It's like, it's there. It's physical. It's an object. What do I do?
How does that feel? Do those days feel good to you? Do they feel squirrely to you? Do they feel?
It can be squirrely. It can be squirrely. I'm familiar with it. Like yourself, a lot of big. I know that to expect that feeling after a big project, where you sometimes have the emotional state that nobody talks about, or that we very rarely talk about. You have to be with somebody else who does books and stuff before you feel safe to say out loud. But I'm okay saying it here, which is there's a little bit of like I hate to to borrow this term, but it's like oftentimes they describe it in psychology as similar to a postpartum thing, where you just feel, oh, I should be happier than I am, or I should be more excited than I am, but you're there's two things that'll happen. One is you still have to do your laundry, even though you did it, right? You still have to be it's just another day in your life, which feels strange. Like you thought you were going to get a ticker tape parade or something. And the other thing is all the momentum and all the work and the anticipation, the expectation, and the cycles that were running in your head. You're free of them for a while, and you expected to like binge Netflix or lay down, but you feel like you want to do a thing again, and you don't have it anymore, and it's strange. You since it's such a new experience, you have to acclimate to it. It's something else.
Yeah, I remember my first book when it released. I had a corporate job, so I was driving home from the corporate job, and I looked around on the highway, and I was like, none of these people's lives look different. Like I thought the crust of the earth was going to open up. Like I did a book, and it was my first book, and I had a lot of expectations that some would say maybe were exaggerated for what would happen on release day. But yeah, it's an odd feeling. It's an exciting feeling, but super excited for you. One of the things you mentioned in your book that I wanted to jump right into was you say that you're a science fiction nerd.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what's on your Mount Rushmore of science fiction books? Like the 4 books that you're like, these are the ones.
Hyperion's number one for me, partially because I grew up in rural South Mississippi, but I had, one of my algebra teacher was from somewhere else and recognized this, like we were watching, like I was talking about Star Trek Next Generation and stuff. And he was like, "Oh, I've got a book for you." And he gave me this book, Hyperion by Dan Simmons. It's been one of those things that might be a movie one day. It's very high-minded, super Dune-like book. And I had never confronted any of these ideas before in my entire life. And it was one of those things like, oh, there are other ways of being a person. There are other things out there. So I always go back to that one. I really enjoy that book. And also, I remember when I first read it, I wrote in the side front flap every word that I'd never seen before, and eventually it filled it up, and then it filled up the back, and it was all these vocabulary terms that I'd never seen before.
Oh, I love that.
And it really sparked something, and it was great. I love that. I also love Rendezvous with Rama, which is going to be a movie soon. I love Dune. Of course, you always have to say Dune. Yeah. I love those, and then all the sort of lesser known. I inherited a bookcase from my dad. In our house, he had old liquor cabinet that was just full of all the pulp science fiction stuff. It's like a tiger man shooting at something with like a scantily clad woman, like all those crappy pulp things. But there was a lot of the lesser known, like Isaac Asimov's and Heinlein and all that stuff were in there. So they all kind of mushed together in my mind as this foundational space of sci-fi stuff that I was too young to be reading. And then Hyperion was handed over to me, and I was like, oh, there's good sci-fi too.
Right. There's an art form to this. It's not just a genre. It's interesting that you made that list of those words. Were you always a curious kid like that? Because there's not a million 13-year-olds that would go, wow, I don't know that word. I don't know the word. And then do the work of creating the list. Like that's a really interesting approach to vocabulary. Were you always like that? Is it something you developed over time?
No, I was the only child with 2 parents who worked, and I was in the woods in the middle of and I got to basically do the leaves of grass. Like I've already been a hermit. Like I started life as a hermit.
That's funny. You don't have to leave your current life to go learn what the monks are trying to teach us.
Yeah. I had a very hermitage childhood, and it was split between running around the woods with the dog and making nunchucks out of sticks and stuff. And then I had my dad it was great of him. He had a subscription to Omni and Popular Mechanics, and I had those. My mom was a voracious romance novel reader. She would go to the thrift store or the used bookstore and get a 25. She'd hand 25 over and get 10 back, and she did that consistently. And so I would peek in those, and then my dad's old sci-fi collection. So words, right as the internet just started to appear, right before we all had that. That was my escape out of that rural world, and knowing that there were others and other things. And I have always been sort of a systems breakdowner, how do people work thing, trying to understand what it means to be a person, and vocabulary. I'm still to this day, one of my greatest passions is trying to think about is articulating the ineffable is something that fascinates me. When we, I remember reading philosophy texts where they wouldn't have a word for something; they just make up a word for it. But angst and ennui and stuff like that. And they're like, we need, even if the word existed, they needed a term. They would create terminology, but it would take a very big idea and shrink it down into a little block. And then you could take that block and build a bigger idea out of it. And then you could shrink that big idea down to a block. And now you're building all these layers of abstraction that make sense of the world just through articulation. Like vocabulary and language can lead to articulating things that we didn't have the ability to do before. And now we can trade ideas back and forth in a way that we can have bigger ideas that emerge. Always has fascinated me, and I've always tried to disassemble it even as a child. And some kids, I guess, disassemble radios. That was what I was doing as a kid, and I'm still doing it right now.
Yeah, and it really comes through in your work. There's this really sincere curiosity that I think you can feel on the page. You can feel when you do audio. That was one of the things that I was curious about. You wrote, produced, recorded a 6-hour audio documentary exploring the idea and the word genius. And it's so good. It's
you've heard it. Oh, wow.
So good. I listened to the first section just the other day, and it opens up with just the most fascinating interview with a 4-year-old who has an IQ of 155.
Yeah.
And you're funny and personable. Like when she introduces you to chickens, and you're like, and she does a chicken noise, and you're like, that's a pretty good chicken. Like there's humor throughout it. So
that's the sticker she gave me.
There you go. There you go. How did you pick that? Like, how did you go, okay, I'm going to disassemble this genius, and I'm going to do, because it's so layered. It's so layered. What made you go off that particular trail?
I was working on how minds change for a long time. And of course, I make a podcast every 2 weeks, and I've always get a chance to spend time with experts and read all these papers and everything. And in the middle of working on this big project, I came across this piece of research that showed first of all the Nobel Prize winners mostly have average IQs, which that was the first thing that excited me. And then I found this thing called Turman's Termite study, which is one of the longest running studies in psychology, where they took all of these really young kids in California who had above average IQs, and they studied them their entire lives. And they all, some were successful. Most of them were successful because they just came from demographics that tend to have advantages. But none of them did anything, as the author, I'm using their words, of note. Nothing nothing that would get them to be considered a genius throughout history. But two of the kids in the study did. They were the two of the kids that were excluded for not having above average IQs. They went on to win the Nobel Prize in Physics separately for two separate things, not working together. And that wouldn't leave me. Like no matter what I was working on, that would keep popping up. And one of the things that drives my work is if an idea insists upon itself, if it just keeps coming back, if I keep telling people about it, I'm like,
so good.
That's
Come
something,
on, dude. If an idea insists upon itself.
Yeah. That's so most good. Everything I've done that's ever been worth anything to anybody has been something like that, where either I looked something up and I was like, what? And I wanted to tell people about it, or it was something that just kept coming back. And I was like, I want to know more about this. Yeah. And the thing that what happens is it starts blossoming into new questions the more you think about it. That was what was happening with me. And it came back to this articulation thing. I was wondering, people say Elon Musk is a genius or Steve Jobs was a genius. And I'm like, you mean like Michelangelo? Or you mean like, what do you mean by the word genius? And then I felt like it wasn't a well-defined term. And then when I picked up a history text about the word itself, and found that the definition of the term has changed with culture. And then I started. I found that the origin of the term came from the Romans had this somewhat religious, spiritual concept of the genius. It comes from the world of the genii, and it's an entity. It's like a spirit figure that pulls you out of the world of the ether into the world of mortals. And it's whatever it gives you, whatever talents or whatever's unique about you, just your personality, that was what they called your genius, the thing that was bestowed upon you at your birth. And here's the thing that made me go, okay, I'm going to do this as a project. every year they had a ritual where they thanked the genii for bringing them into the world. And in that ritual, you would burn a little cake and sing a hymn. And it's the origin of the birthday party. So, so, so it occurred to me that we each are born with our own particular genius. And I had interviewed Scott Barry Kaufman about the fact that he's one of the world's leading intelligence researchers, but he was considered below average intelligence. He scored low on an IQ test and had to go through school with a lot of disadvantages. But he had a hearing disorder, and that's why he got scored low. And he had to fight to get into the world he was in so that he could manifest his genius and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, there's so much stuff in here. So I just turned in the manuscript, and I should have rested and said, done something, should have gone on vacation, anything. But instead, I just immediately sent out a bunch of emails to people who were intelligence researchers. And then I emailed Mensa and said, could you put me in touch with a bunch of high IQ people? And they said, just come on out. So I was the first journalist that got to go to Mensa headquarters and spend all day with them. And they put me in touch with Juliet. And I just couldn't, I didn't know what I was going to put everything in the story, but when I walked in the door of their house, I flew out to their house in California. They said her parents were like, hey, how you doing? This is Juliet. And they just left. And I spent all day with this. She had just turned 5, like a couple days earlier.
Yeah.
It was one of the best days of my life, all day long, with just in her world and marveling at her fascination and doing math puzzles and playing with her chickens and all this stuff. And I was off. And that became a beautiful project. That'll be my next book for sure.
I was going to say, definitely.
Yeah, I love that project so much. And it's a testament to like my own arc of like moving more and more into I want to do more and more science journalism that has that on the ground storytelling feel to it.
Yeah, I thought it was just brilliant. It's so good. We'll make sure to link to your website where folks can listen to that. So the word arc's interesting because you've had an interesting career arc. I kind of have a weird shaped job, like where, like if you tell people I have a neighbor who regularly says to me, I still don't know exactly what you do. Like, and then I'll give it a label and be like, I'm an author, I'm a speaker. You've had an interesting career arc too, from journalist to voice actor. You've written a million different things. Walk us through kind of the progression of you're at the University of Southern Mississippi. You're studying, you're majoring in journalism. You're going to be a reporter. You're editing, or you're in charge of the Facebook comments for the news channel at some point. And you get threats. There's a lot there. How do you start making the steps to what you're doing now? Or I guess the first question, how would you describe what your job or career is now?
It's just like you. It's hard to elevator pitch it. If I put it on a CV, I say I'm a science journalist. Sometimes I say I'm a writer, an author, a speaker, all that stuff that people say. What I think of myself is I am very fortunately have worked my way into a world where when I get obsessed with something and I feel a passion for it, I will pursue it and then tell you whatever I learned. That's what I do. That's pretty simple. And the things that I'm interested in are in this domain of brains and minds, culture. So that's the sort of content that I put out. And I'm agnostic about where it comes out. It could be audio, it could be video, it could be book, text. I am a serially obsessed autodidact, as I say, and I want to tell you about this stuff. It gives me joy. I can't get enough of it, and I want to unfurl it because I'm trying to understand me and what it means to be a stumbling, fumbling human in this rock thing floating through space. And the way I connect to it is by doing this and then sharing it and getting feedback and then moving forward with it. So that's what I say I do. But my journey to get to do that for a living was just all over the place. Before I went to school to university, I went there late. I went to college at 27. I went right after high school, but then it was like, I want to do other stuff. And that's because I got into a car wreck and shattered my spine. I couldn't walk. I had to learn how to walk, all that stuff.
How long was that process?
It was about a year.
Okay.
I missed my entire senior year of high school. I had to be homeschooled, or I had one teacher would come to the house and give me all my stuff. And
How did that impact how you look at science, how you look at your life, how you look at deconstructing or rebuilding?
I I think I developed a whimsy from it. Uh, it like you once you've gone all into something like that and come out of it, you the joys are more joyous, and the things that are weird about life, I can usually laugh at myself in a way that I got from that. I think I was on the path to being a dark triad kind of dude, and that just knocked that out forever. And I'm just grateful to have anything at all. And I used to work. I remember I used to work construction and sell leather coats and all sorts of really hard labor, blue collar stuff. And after uh, I took the money from the car wreck and I used it to buy a pet store because I used to work on my grandparents' farm as a kid.
None of the, when I asked this question, I was hoping there'd be a little, like a handful of interesting things, but
it's true. It's
like,
true. Like I said,
pet store is not.
Serially obsessed on it. I took the money for that. I bought a pet store because I used to work at my grandparents' farm in the summers, and I loved animals. And I was like, oh, this will be something. But it turns out if you love animals, I'm sure there are pet store owners who are great and they take care of everything. I didn't feel like I was my joy. I feel like it wasn't the right job for the kind of way I felt about animals. So I did that for a while. But it was the pet store did so well. I bought I opened a second one in a city 2 hours away and had both going for a while. But at some point, I just was done, and I sold the whole business and decided to go to school for something. And the I went to school to be a psychologist. I got all the way to the end of the program for the bachelor's degree, and there was a sign on the just stuck up somewhere on campus that said opinionated, like in big Helvetica with a question mark, and then underneath it said "Come write for the school newspaper." And I was like, "Really? That's a thing?" And I went into the school newspaper's office and I said, "How do you do this?" And somebody in there was like, "Just email us." I was like, "Oh, cool." So and this is how it starts. And I'm going to answer the first part of your question at the end of this because it's all pertinent, which is I had in one of my psychology classes, there was this study that made me laugh, which was, and I'm sure by now it's been replicated or not replicated. I don't know how. I haven't looked back on it in a while, but when your favorite sports team loses, they said that the study showed that men's sperm counts would go down. And at our campus that year, every single football game that our team had played, they had lost. And I thought of a fun headline, which was so, the university's sperm counts reaches record low according to scientists. Which of course, when you read it, it's like it suggests that must be true if this is true.
Yeah.
But I thought it would be a great headline, and I wrote that. They printed it, and then in one of my classes, the professor said, "Have you seen this? This is funny." And that was it. I was like, "Oh man, that feels good." And and I switched my major. I immediately took an internship at a small newspaper, and then when I graduated, I went to start working in newspapers, and went from that to TV journalism, where I did the web side of things for a while, but I would go in front of the camera every once in a while. And you talk about the car wreck. The long answer to that, to tie it all together, is when I would be in those white collar cubicle world and people would complain about stuff, I would feel like can you believe I used to dig ditches. This is incredible. And so
they have the air conditioner on. Can you imagine all this air?
My frustration tolerance was pretty high.
Yeah.
But it was there in the TV world doing web stuff. I didn't get to write anymore, and I really missed it. And I just so happened to be I was like, I want to. It was the time when blogs were really popular in a way they're not today. That there were all these individual idea blogs, like shit my dad says and awkward family photos. Just one little thin, teeny concept, because you could just make one kind of content. And I remember the person swap experiment, and it was Darren Brown had recreated it for one of his specials, where you ask somebody for directions on a college campus, and then two people walk between you and the person who's giving you the directions, and they're usually holding something big like a door or a portrait, and then one of them switches places with the person who was asking for the directions, and the person giving directions doesn't notice that the person's changed. And they would change like height, just everything. They would change everything about the person's appearance. The person still wouldn't notice. The actual research shows about 50% of the time that happens. I thought, oh, that would be a cool blog where I bet all the stuff that we think we see the world one-to-one, but whether it's facts or beliefs or perceptions, the assumption, it's the certainty we have that we see the world as it is, not as we perceive it. And that was excited me. And so I was like, that'd be a cool one idea blog, but it became lots of ideas. And I wrote a little post on that blog about brand loyalty that went viral thanks to somebody stealing an iPhone over at Gizmodo, and they republished it. They asked if they could republish it because I think they were just trying to keep the hits going, the momentum going. Mm-hmm. And that went so viral that the publishing world came along. My fantastic agent, still my agent, Erin Malone, she emailed, and she had worked on Freakonomics, and she just extended her hand and said, "Would you like to join us here in Book World?" I was like, "Yes, I would very much." And and I wrote the book, and the book did really well, bestseller, all these different languages. They gave me a sequel. I wrote a sequel, and it's just called "You Are Now Less Dumb," which I think is funny. Nobody else liked the title would be, and and I wanted to promote that, and I was like, oh, these podcast things are a new thing. So for a second time, I was in the right place at the right time. I was like, I'll make a podcast to promote the book. And I've been doing that podcast for 12 years now because this is the centerpiece.
Which is 100 years in podcast terms.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a small statement.
And that led to everything else because that's the center of my solar system. Everything revolves around it. It's a place where I have ideas about things. I have obsessions. I have concepts. I want to talk about a book I read. I want to get the author on. I do podcasts, and sometimes those things develop into bigger and bigger ideas, which is how Minds Change came from. I was working on a series of shows about all sorts of stuff.
And I think what's interesting about the book is that it starts with you kind of admitting some cynicism and then discovering hope. So walk us through that, that kind of transformation for you that happens in How Minds Change.
Thank you. That's a great question. I've wanted to talk about this so much. Because I have You Are Not So Smart, and because I've done so many episodes about it, and and I have books about it, and I was doing lectures about it, it was very easy to have cynicism when you write a bunch about motivated reasoning. And motivated reasoning, for anyone who's not familiar with the term, if you want a piece of chocolate cake, you will find a reason to eat the chocolate cake. You'll say, I'll exercise tomorrow, whatever. You'll find a reason to do it.
Is it a fancy justification?
Yeah, motivated cognition includes all those things. So motivated reasoning, justification, explanation, rationalization. And some of my favorite studies are in that domain where you have somebody flip a coin or you tell them they flipped a coin and they've either won $200 or they've lost $100. And you say, you have the option to flip again. So if it comes up heads, you gain 200, comes up tails, you lose 100. And then they tell you what you flipped, and they ask you, would you like to flip again? And no matter which way it goes, everyone chooses to flip again, but they'll rationalize it differently or justify it differently. If they got some money, they'll say, I'm ahead, so I can risk it. And if they're down money, they'll say, well, I need to win back the money that I just lost. But either way, they choose to do it again. They come up with a justification. Yeah. But what I love about that study is if you do not tell people the outcome of the flip, nobody chooses to flip again. So we only make decisions that we can justify. And that's what that research suggests. And we tend to only make the decisions that are easiest to justify, not the ones that are quote unquote best. I love that stuff. And I was talking about that in terms of when people would ask me questions about, well, I have a family member who thinks this or whatever. I'm like, well, they're telling you that, but that's a justification for something deeper. And then I remember very plainly, I was doing a Q&A and someone was telling me about how they had a family member who believed in the reptilian stuff. And they were like, how do I get him out of this thing? How do I convince him that that's not true? And I just told him you can't. And it was like locking your keys in your car. I was like, oh, wait, I don't know if I actually believe what I just said out loud. I don't want to believe what I just said out loud.
Yeah.
Or
that people can't change, that minds can't change.
Yeah. I'm dead. I don't know. I guess I've had a bucket list mentality from 18 on, which is I never really have thought about that till just now, but that's part of who I am for sure.
Yeah, I mean, because there's a couple things you say, and maybe not casually, but you say them because they're part of your story and they feel natural and normal to you because they're part of your story. But I liked animals, so I bought a pet store. Like, that's not a
Wow, I never really thought about that.
That's not a sentence humans say. And then you're like, and I didn't love it, but I was still good at it. So I franchised in essence and had a second pet store. Like, that's an unusual big thing that the average person doesn't just go, I really liked, cricket. So I started the Nashville Cricket League, and I built a pitch, and like, those are interesting, unique things, and they're complete changes of career. So if somebody was listening to this and they were saying, okay, I've got a passion I'm curious about, I want to explore it to the level you explore stuff, what would be the first step? Like, or what would be a kind of dip my toe in the water into the world of, I'm going to see how far I can pull this thread?
I've tried a couple different ways of doing this, but the thing that always works for me is I email someone who seems like they know what they're doing or they're in that world already and say, can we hang out for a minute? And I can ask you a bunch of questions. And I have like an 85% success rate before I had anything that they could Google and go, okay, I'll talk to this guy. People are eager to share their worlds with you. They're eager to share their passions and where they're at. And anything I've ever thought that I might get into, I'd find somebody who's doing it. With the pet store stuff, that's exactly what I did. I found somebody who had one, and I was like, walked in, talked to him about it. I was like, hey, can we like meet and talk about this? Everything I've leapt into, I've tried to talk to people who are already there and get an idea of what their life is like. And sometimes they're like, don't do this, but I'll think, well, that's just because the way they're doing it's not the way I would do it sometimes. But sometimes their advice of don't do this, I'm like, okay, well, I won't do that. That seems like a bad idea. Like, I haven't ever met a lawyer that said, yeah, you should be a lawyer.
That's a funny sentence too. That's a funny, yeah. Collect career advice and try to see if it's consistent.
But and remember your values. Like you can't take the advice in the way that you see. Where does my Venn diagram overlap with this person? Would I feel this way in the experiences that they've had? And then ask that person, where would you suggest I go for more stuff? And that's the person who'll tell you the books to get. That's the person that'll tell you the thing you should watch, or the other person you should talk to. So that's usually how I do my first bit of research. And that is still how I do books and podcasts and everything else. I come in and ask somebody who knows what they're doing and an expert to connect me to the other people in that world, and then wade into it and let it tell me what it is. Like, it's impossible not to have some biases and preconceived notions, but you're go in trying to, you don't necessarily have to even say, I'm going to bust all this or create some null hypotheses or whatever. Let the idea emerge. Let it reveal itself, because it will. You have enough conversations and it will reveal itself to you. And that's usually the way I go with it.
What's your idea kind of curation process like? Are you a notebook guy and you're like, I've always got a notebook with me? I'm an audio text guy and I text myself these. Like, when you think about, because you're talking about thousands and thousands of ideas, there's thousands and thousands of ideas that are in How Minds Change. There's thousands of ideas that are in You Are Now Less Dumb, which I think is a funny title. I think that's funny too. There's been a time or two I've been the one person that liked the title of my book, and I was like, oh, I shouldn't have fought that hard for that one. Turns out they were right. That was a difficult title. But I really like that one. And you can buy Happiness, and You Have Too Many Friends on Facebook. Like, your subtitles are really great too, because they're very sticky. But how do you collect ideas, curate ideas, store ideas, roll around with them?
Thank you. Like any other writer, I've tried everything you can imagine. I have hundreds of little notebooks, but these are not useful. I don't recommend doing this because I write stuff in them, I lose them, and I fill them up. I try to have one central notebook that always is with me, but I don't necessarily keep it in my pocket. I keep it like in a backpack. That's not my method. That is some sort of anxiety reducing thing that makes me feel like I'm a writer. That doesn't really.
I have the same notebook. Like, that's a control thing. Like, how can I control how loud and chaotic? Yeah, totally.
The real thing that I do is I have a shower, a water resistant notepad stuck on in my shower wall, which a lot of stuff comes from there. And I write it, pull it off, I bring it in this room, I sit it down. I transfer. I have some right here. These are shower cards, shower things.
I love that.
This one was an idea for how to do it. I was like, here's one way you could do an interview. Like, what did you do before this? What is now this? What's your current thing? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What was the solution? And what's your future plan? I was like, that's a cool idea. Then this one is do a show about do a show about populist movements, but by talking about how popular the convoy stuff was in the past, blah blah blah. Register their rate. These little things, all these little things, right? So that's one part of my system. But when it comes to this room, this gets put into the actual system. So I have a pretty well organized Google Doc thing, Google Drive and stuff in it. And then the thing that's pretty much where all my notes go, big Google Drive thing, because it's cross platforms, cross devices. The other thing I have
is it categorized by podcast, book? Like, do you have buckets like that?
It is. It's my categorization system evolves over time. And I've tried everything. I've tried Airtable and all those organization management tools. I just don't connect to that stuff well. I'm not sure what it is. If I had a bigger team, I probably would. But my Google Drive or Google Doc, the Google Docs part of it. Let's see if I can. I'll pull it up really quickly and not try to burn any time.
No. This stuff is. I don't get to ask these questions always. I'm sure you don't get these questions. I mean, this is process, which is really fascinating to a lot of people.
I've got it currently categorized as fiction, lectures, promotion, journalism, defunct projects, studies, books, main space. That's where I do like my checklist of what I do on a weekly, daily basis.
Yep.
Consulting and freelance, notes, television, podcasts, and notability. So notability is the most important thing in my process. I wish I could kiss every person on that development team. I have an iPad Pro. I have notability on it. I love this thing.
I've never even heard of notability.
It's the greatest. Like it's hand. You write in your natural handwriting, but you can manipulate that handwriting in every way you can imagine. You can move it, cut, paste, move around, slide things around in big and in small and different. It's like a notebook from some cyberpunk movie in the 90s. You can do anything you want with text with it. And then you can organize that very densely the way that we just mentioned with this organization system. And it will turn anything written into typed text if you want. You could also pull, but the thing I love most about it is I pull PDF. I used to, over in the side of the office, I used to have all these legal boxes full of studies. I would print out studies, take a red pen, and I had my own sort of shorthand that I would use, and I would circle things and make notes to myself, and then try to put them in piles. With notability, it sounds like they owe me money for what I'm about to say.
They're not a sponsor.
I would gladly take them as a sponsor. I just import a PDF. I have all sorts of services where I can go have the actual literature, the scientific documents. I import the PDF. And by the way, if you don't want to do those services, email any scientist that's ever written anything. They'll send you the PDF for free. You don't have to pay for it.
Oh, that's great.
And they want you to email them. Nobody ever talks to them. Nobody ever says you did a great job.
They do this amazing, difficult work for years, and then it sits somewhere in like the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, it costs $45 to look at it. Like they want to send it to you. So I take those PDFs, I import them. It can come from my desktop, my laptop, or wherever, or you can do it on the iPad. Import it into Notability, and then I take it in Notability. I mark it up, and then now I have all these studies marked up and ready for my perusal whenever I want. And then it's cross-platform. If I want to look at my Notability stuff, I can do it here on the desktop. That has been a huge game changer for my process, and it makes researching anything so much better. And I use Notability in combination with Google Drive, Docs, and all that stuff, and that's the meat of my stuff. And then all around me are these text notebooks that are just there to make me feel like I'm a writer.
Yeah, I have my whole shelf. You can kind of see it behind me. This right over here is a bunch of different sizes. Like Leuchtturm is my jam.
I love them. I'm a Rhodia. I love Rhodia here lately, and I found this notebook, and it's so beautiful.
It's even longer.
Look, it's a ledger.
Yeah,
that you can talk. They can see like you're running a general store in 1850. And what I do is I fill it up with everything I did today. So I used to keep that as a digital journal, but I find this helps a lot to keep a diary, just a work only diary. So you can kind of refer back to what you've done. I'll probably go back to digital because I can search it and tag it and stuff.
Yeah.
But that's been incredibly useful to go, oh, I did do that thing or talk to that thing, or when was I last on this project? So I do keep a work diary, and I got this was a wonderful gift. This is a space pen. This is the pen the astronauts use.
Yeah.
I switched to it because just because of this. It has the clicker on the side, and for some reason,
Yeah.
when you're finished writing something, it feels good to go.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah, exactly. It's like shutting the door at the barn. Like you got all the horses in.
And it'll work in space and underwater, which,
Yeah. Well, I know you're constantly in space trying to write ideas. To that point, how long?
That was a gift from my wife. It's one of the best gifts I ever had.
Oh, that's fantastic. How long until you start, or maybe you're already starting? Your book came out yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It's the latest book. All the books are really fun. You Are Not So Smart, so funny. You Are Now Less Dumb, so funny, so helpful, so kind of sticky, counterintuitive thoughts. How long does it take until you're jumped in pretty deep to another book project?
I will be submitting the full proposal for Genius or Exploring Genius, whatever title we come up with for it, probably next weekend. I don't know when I'll start the process of writing it or doing the new research, but I'm going to get the engine rolling for my publisher to set up everything and set up timelines for me. And once everything is kind of go, when they hit the green light, I'll be going again. So I'll be promoting How Minds Change probably for the rest of my life, but for the next year, a lot. And I have a couple of live events in Montreal and Toronto and Los Angeles and New York later in the year, starting like September. And but I suspect that by September, I'll be actually working on my next book while I'm also promoting this one.
Okay, perfect. Have you ever taken time between them? Like I took too long between two books and got afraid of the book process again.
Yes.
And I was like, and it got really, really hard.
Yes.
Have you? So now
I'm trying to avoid that. Yes.
Yeah, I have to stay in motion. Like I can't, like I have to be like Tom Brady, where like the day after the Super Bowl, I'm throwing footballs because I get afraid of the football if I wait like a month. I'm like, I don't even know what this thing is. Which end do you throw?
Commiserate times a million with you on this. Yeah, I took too long between You Are Now Less Dumb and this book, to the point that I was like, it reminded me of that old editor. There's something. Yeah, you have to look it up, but there's something where like some journalist wrote to their editor, like at the New York Times, like, I'm sorry, I can't deliver this week because I've forgotten how to write.
Yeah.
Like I had done podcasting for so long, and I did it for years. There's a long gap between the last book and the beginning of this book. And as I was trying to write it, it was coming out in podcast voice, and I did not like it. And I can tell you, this is a thing. I mentioned it in the acknowledgement. When I did get everything going, and when I was time to deliver some material, the first thing I sent to my first editor. This book went through a couple of different editors as the editing world shifted as I was working on it. I sent him. His name was Eamon Dolan. He was the first editor on the book, and then after that was Nikki Papadopoulos and Trish Daly. I sent Eamon an email, and it was the first chapter that I had finished. It was 30,000 words long. It was a 30,000.
The first chapter was
because I was in podcast mind, and it was 30,000 words on conspiracy theory stuff. He called me, and this never happened. He never called me after seeing an email. And it was no adult man has ever done this in my entire life with me. He called me. I was like, hello. And he answered with, "What are you thinking?" He didn't even say, "Hey,
wait,
David."
You said hello, and he said, "What are you thinking?"
Yes. And I said, "I don't understand." And he said, 30,000 words? Like, I'm an editor. I get it. Do you want me to edit down 30,000 words into a chapter for you? Is that what you want? And because if you're not 30,000 words is for a lot of mainstream publications, that's half a book.
My last book was 50,000 words.
Yeah.
Put that in perspective.
And I was like, well, I just thought we'd work on it together. He's like, you don't, you go back to the drawing board. And I was like, oh, wow, that's bad.
How do you process that? Because like everybody's going to get some form of email like that.
That I took that way too hard. That gutted me. That filled me with a lot of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and all the rest. I was like, wow, I may have bitten off more than I could chew. I may have asked to step into the bigger leagues of writing this kind of book, and they said, well, you just aren't ready for it. Like I really felt that at first. But I went back to it, and I just worked. I was like, I feel like I can do this, and then I delivered and he was a lot happier after I worked on it a little bit and tried again. And along the way, everyone has been very helpful in that regard. I learned a lot writing How Minds Changed about how to write books like this, books that have one continuous arc. My previous material benefited from the fact that the chapters were very self-contained. This book is not like every chapter speaks to the next chapter, and they all work together for one.
Yeah, you pull the thread. Like there's a consistent thread where there's some books where you get the sense that the author's like, you put it together, and you're like, how are these things related? And this book doesn't feel like that for a second. There's a consistent thread.
Very on purpose.
It's very on purpose. It stays on message. It all relates. It's a really great tapestry. So yeah, that's interesting to hear that. The story I've often heard that kind of haunts me with books is a publisher told me, yeah, this author, like we contracted for this topic and they turned in something that was the complete opposite. Like it was a nonfiction and they turned in like a romance novel and just like had caught up. And I was like, so whenever I turn something, then there's this part of me that is like, are they going to be like, what is this? Like this is all about horses. And I'm like, I know horses are a metaphor for goals. Like, so I'm always,
that's funny. Yeah. But full disclosure, the proposal that I put forth is not the book that came out of it.
It never is. No, like the proposal is a starting of a conversation and an establishment of trust for me. Like, oh, they trust that I'm going to do this. I'm going to get, but I never end up writing the book I start out to write. Like the idea that you'd have an outline that you're like, it's day 87 of my outline. Now I'm on step. Like that's never.
Same here. And it feels good to hear you say that. Like, cause I wonder, are there other people who do that? They write an outline and then the book is the outline. And cause I like it. I don't know enough. I mean, if I was a neuroscientist and I'm writing about my work, sure. But yeah. I'm a journalist. I'm going out to learn things that I don't know yet and meet people who are going to surprise me. It's going to reveal itself in the process, and I trust that process, and I feel like I can, I know how to navigate it. So I can't imagine writing a proposal and then handing you the very thing that I thought the book would be like. That seems
no, I don't have the answers yet. Yeah. Like I have the questions and I'm going to figure out great answers, but I don't have the answers before I start. And maybe it works for fiction. I always dream, like if I'm ever stuck in a book, I'm like, man, I wish this was like a spy novel. And I just had to like, I imagine like people who write spy novels are like, what? This is, now you take him to Lucerne and he goes to Switzerland and he jumps on a train. Like this is the train scene, you dummy.
Yeah, there's a bomb on the train and now, it goes off in 15 minutes. You got 50,
and that's a whole chapter. In the next chapter, he meets a girl. Like I sometimes imagine like, and I know it's not that at all. I'm sure that they look at nonfiction and probably say the same thing, just a different version.
Yeah.
So that always cracks me up. So, okay, two last questions. How, if somebody's listening to this, because you talk a lot about, talking with people that have kind of locked in thoughts or locked in beliefs. If I'm like, eventually it's going to be Thanksgiving. It feels forever away now, but the summer's going by really quickly. Eventually it's going to be Thanksgiving. And I'm sitting across from an uncle, because it's often an uncle. Yeah. And they have a hardcore flat earther perspective.
Oh, that's
They're like, I'm in and I'm all in, and this is my thing. And so I'm sitting there and I'm a niece or nephew and I want to have a good conversation. I don't want to have a fight because my mom is already saying hey, don't fight with your uncle. You know what he believes. What, in talking with that person, and maybe the goal isn't I'm going to change their mind before stuffing, but what does that look like? How, because that's a real scenario that a lot of people will really face, especially as we get towards midterm elections and there's going to be another presidential, we're not done arguing. So in all your research, all the knowledge, how would I approach that?
Okay.
Using flat earth as the perspective.
I like using flat earth too. It's nice and neutral. And I spent in the book, you'll see, I spent time with flat earthers.
That's why I asked it. That's fascinating.
Which I love. I love flat earthers. This is one of my favorite groups to hang out with. As far as for conspiratorial communities. Okay, so in the book, I don't even get to talking about this kind of stuff till about page 200 because I want you to understand all the underlying science behind it and take you through all the people that I meet who did or didn't change their mind in all these different ways. And so we can understand it. And then, now knowing all that, what works. So without trying to go into all that, I'll go closer to the technique but I do want you to state that these things are based off of how we evolved to interact with one another. We have two systems, basically. One for generating propositions, one for evaluating propositions. And we work best in environments where we're allowed to have biases and present our stuff from our biased perspective in a very lazy way, and be safe for the other person to evaluate it, and we can work together toward goals. Like it's sort of the muscles in your arm can be used to paint a beautiful painting, but that's not what the selective pressures that created those muscles weren't painting over the course of millions of years. It was the same thing is true for the way we can discuss things and argue things and debate things and deliberate. It was never about trying to figure out what is and isn't true in a philosophical sense. It was about goal setting. It was so we could work together as a group toward planning things and reach consensus. So that's the system that you want to lean into if you want to have any kind of useful conversation with someone who disagrees or sees things differently from you. And there's ways to leverage all of that. I like to think about it in, like, if you ever see a movie with, your very closest friend, and this happened to me recently, you love the movie, and then you get out of the movie and they're like, God, that was the worst movie I've ever seen. And you're like, but you don't like go, how dare you? I'm us, you're them. I'll never talk to you again. Yeah. And you don't even get into a fight about it. You playfully are like, I love you. I trust you. We have similar values. This stuff is all there. So why is this? And they tell you, and you tell them, and you both move a little bit because of that. Well, that's because you aren't facing off in an arena. You went shoulder to shoulder and you faced the question of, I wonder why we disagree. You can go into that frame with anybody. And if it's an attitude-based thing, it's going to be a little bit different than what I'm going to describe. But that's just because attitudes are evaluations, and there's more to it than just straight up, is this or is this not true? The same thing with values. But flat Earth is great because we got a claim. The claim is, hey, the Earth ain't round, it's flat. Mm-hmm. So the way you would do this, and this comes from, this is the synthesis of a lot of different techniques. In the book, I talk about deep canvassing and street epistemology and motivational interviewing and cognitive behavioral therapy and elaboration likelihood model and smart politics. The weird thing is none of these groups have met each other, knew of each other, and some of them that weren't in science domains didn't know there was underlying science that supported them. But they all pretty much came up with the same thing after A/B testing thousands of conversations, and it all pretty much goes in the same order. Which to me seems like, oh, that means something.
That's significant.
That seems significant. First thing is to establish rapport. If you've had a conflict with this person in the past, you're going to have to get into a place where you're not feeling that feeling of, I don't want to avoid conflict. I don't want to have this conversation, because you're remembering it usually goes poorly. You need to start remembering conversations that went well. The rapport building stage, as frustrating as this is, that might take a minute before you can start up one of these conversations, because you need to develop trust with the other person. And the trust usually comes in the framing of, since we're social primates, they don't feel like there's a chance that they're going to get shamed, that they're going to be told that what they think, feel, and believe, they should be ashamed to feel that way, that there's a danger in them keeping that idea in their head. And the danger is ostracism. The danger is, I'm going to look upon you as lesser than, you're going to be a them. I'm going to go back to my us, and you're now them forever. Like, we really resist that. Yeah. Of course we resist it. That's death for proto-humans. That's something we would be avoiding.
Being outside of the tribe.
So if you say anything that could be interpreted that way, it may not be your intent, and it may not be, may not think to yourself that this is how someone would take that, but that's not, this is about them. It's on their side. And I want to emphasize that all of this is about staying on their side. Like, you cannot copy and paste your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs or your reasoning into another person. This is about encouraging the other person to engage in reasoning on their own and explore their own reasoning. So you start with that. And the very next thing you want to do is ask for a specific claim. If it's a fact-based issue, you ask for a very specific claim. In this case, it would be, the Earth is flat. So you'd say, and they may claim something more specific in there about the Earth being flat. But whatever it is, it's a very specific claim. And then you take that claim, and this is across all these techniques. You say, okay, you say the Earth is flat. How confident are you that that's true? Or what is your level of certainty? If we had to put a number on it, you could say 0 to 10, 1 to 100, something in there. And this is where the magic begins, because this is how you open up a space for a person to engage in introspection and metacognition. Maybe they say they're a 7, and you could follow that up with either, why does that number feel right to you? I like starting there, because if you could, I swear, do this to anything. Do this today. Anyone listening to this, do this with anything. Recently, an example that comes to mind is the last season of Game of Thrones. Where would you give it what rating would you give that on a 1 to 10? whatever you say, then I follow it up with why. And it's a different feeling. It's a different thought process than coming up. You know the number immediately. The feeling comes out of you so fast. But then when I ask you to tell me why it came out of you that way, well, this starts kind of being perplexing. One of the weirdest feelings is, I don't know if I even have thought about why I feel this way. And you start coming up with all these rationalizations and justifications for it. The thing I want to illustrate is the feeling is there. The rationalizations and justifications, you're making them up on the spot. It's what seems salient, what seems reasonable, and most importantly, what it seems like other people would consider reasonable. People in your trusted peer group consider reasonable. Things that they would say, no, that seems like a just justification. Your position is rational, sir. I say go forth. So you ask for the question of the number, and one of the things you can do, and this comes from motivational interviewing, is you said you're a 7. How come? Why not a 4? Well, that's a different kind of thought. Like, well, I didn't say I didn't say I totally hated it, so I wonder why I feel that way. And when it comes to the flat Earth thing, if they said what their certainty was at a 7, I mean, ask why is it not an 8? Why is it not a 9? Why aren't you at a 10 on this? And they will produce on their own counter arguments, which is something they may not have ever done. They may have never even considered why they aren't higher on the number scale, and they will produce internal counter arguments, and then you move the conversation in the direction of those counter arguments. Is one way of doing it, but the way street epistemology does it is you ask for the claim, you get their definitions, you try to make sure you repeat the claim, make sure you really are putting it in words that they agree you do hear them, and that you do have their proposition, their argument, like it is truly what they think. It's not your construction of it. Ask for their definitions of certain things, use only their definitions, ask for that number, and then somewhere in there, you don't have to use this tilted language, but you could say, what reasons do you hold that? What is a good reason that you would use as a justification for having that? And that's when those come out. What you want to move it to is this last space, which is, how did you determine that was a good reason? Which is now that you're really getting deeper into the processing chain. When you ask somebody something about a fact-based claim like the flat Earth, you want to get them into a space. You're just opening up that space where we're shoulder to shoulder now, and we're investigating what method are you using to arrive at the reason that you're using as the justification for your level of confidence. The conversation slowly gets to that spot, and you just let it play out from there. And people will talk for a while in there, and they often will find they'll privately, without feeling like they're losing face, without feeling like they have to admit anything, they will realize that I may not have done my due diligence on this. Like that often comes out. And you don't have to even illustrate it. You just let the space be there because we're just talking about it.
And it's not a gotcha moment. You let the space be there.
Yeah. And your help that I've watched lots of their videos, and it's really miraculous to see how just having that conversation, just holding the space and being sort of a help, being sort of guiding their metacognition, just being a cheerleader. It feels a lot like therapy. Listen, summarize, repeat, and wish them well at the end. It's almost impossible to have that kind of a conversation with someone where they don't move a little bit in some direction, either on attitude or on certainty. And enough conversations, and people can move a good bit. That's one of the methods from the book that I found. It seems like that's not enough. It's like there's not enough steps, but it is incredible what one person will do when you give them the space to introspect in that way, because we often aren't afforded that kind of space. We just we're at the conclusion of that process is where we stay and live in, and we very rarely go back through it. It's the whole reason there is such a thing as therapy. And these processes work really well in helping a person explore their own reasoning and methodologies. And
I love that. Yeah. I think that's really helpful. And there's so much more to that answer. Again, you did a great job trying to summarize 200 pages of scientific. You were like, here's the deal. This is page 208 you're asking about. So my last two questions, the first one's real easy. The second one's pretty easy too. What movie were you guys disagreeing about? You and your friend.
Top Gun.
He liked it. He didn't like it. You liked it.
I loved it.
I loved it too. I thought it was amazing. It was so much fun. From the opening note, I was like, "This is yes." It felt like childhood to me.
Yeah, I came there for what I got. It wasn't Shakespeare. It was.
Yeah, you weren't gonna question your soul on the way out and be like, "I got to make some changes in my life," other than running, I guess, in the forest.
Yeah, I had fun, and but it was what's interesting in the conversation was the reason I came to see the movie was what I got out of it.
Yeah.
But for them, that was since their expectations were matched, it didn't feel like it was worth even seeing. Like they could have written it on their own. And
is it possible they hate Kenny Loggins? Did that come up at all?
And once we did the method, we got to Kenny Loggins.
You created a space where he could admit he hated Kenny Loggins.
And it was like, oh, clearly this has nothing to do with filmmaking. It's just Kenny Loggins. You have a prejudice against the Loggins.
You hate the danger zone.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
I want to live in the danger zone.
Yeah.
I want to get on a highway to it. And you took the first exit you saw, and you don't even like the movie now.
That's so good. That's so good. All right, last question. Where can people find out more about you? Website, book, give it to us. A podcast. You got a lot going on.
Sure. The everything related to my podcast and You Are Not So Smart stuff is at youarenotSoSmart.com. The podcast is You Are Not So Smart. Anything that I'm not doing that's popped off into these other domains, like How Minds Change and other stuff. The documentary you talked about. Go to just davidmcraney.com or follow me on Twitter at David McRaney, and you should find all that stuff there.
Well, it was a blast. We definitely went over my allotted time. I said, I'll get you out of here in 30 or 40 minutes. It was a blast.
I enjoyed it.
So many good questions. So thanks for doing it, David. Have a great week.
Hey, thanks so much. This is incredible, by the way. I love your show. You're an incredible interviewer. This has been one of the best.
I appreciate that. That's fun, man. Thanks, dude. Thank you so much for listening to my interview with David McRaney today. We'll put all the links in the show notes as always. And thank you for reviewing my podcast. The reviews you write are super encouraging. Please, please, please keep them coming. Thank you for doing that. Make sure you subscribe, like, or follow, or whatever it is the kids are saying these days. And please write a review.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about the All It Takes Is a Goal podcast and to get access to today's show notes and exclusive content from Jon Acuff, visit acuff.me/podcast. Thanks again for joining us. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the All It Takes Is a Goal podcast.